After World War II, American, Soviet, French, and British forces jointly occupied Germany and Berlin, seen here. West Germany joined NATO in 1954, and then a year later, on May 5, 1955, American, French, and British forces announced they would end their military occupation and created the Federal Republic of West Germany, a sovereign republic with close ties to the West. West Berlin was often referred to as an island of freedom because it was a democratic, capitalistic city in the heart of Soviet-controlled Germany. On August 13, 1961, the Soviets built a wall around East Berlin. This, along with armed guards, stopped passage between East and West Berlin for anyone. Families and friends were separated as the wall went up basically overnight. On October 26 of 1961, American tanks and Soviet tanks had a standoff at Checkpoint Charlie. 10 American tanks were placed facing Soviet East Berlin, and in response, Soviets placed tanks on their side facing the Americans. After over 24 tense hours, the Soviets removed their tanks on the morning of the 28th. Americans withdrew soon after, and the standoff was over.
I'm Steve Frisbee. I'm Macy's granddad, and I was in Germany in the summer of 1966 as a exchange student from my high school in Hilton, New York. I spent about 10 weeks in Germany, and during that time, among other things, we visited the city of Berlin, which at the time was divided as was Germany.
In June of 1963, John F. Kennedy visited West Berlin and gave his famous speech in front of the Brandenburg Gate, supporting West Germany and condemning the Soviet Union's actions.
All free men, wherever they may live, are citizens of Berlin. And therefore, as a free man, I take pride in the words, Ich bin ein Berliner.
I just truly loved him. Ich bin ein Berliner. As he ended his speech, that's what he said, and he signed the guest book. And the people in Berlin loved him because, and they thought that they had hope through him that maybe the city could be reunited. There were families that were totally separated, totally split apart. They couldn't see each other. It was a bad deal. And when Kennedy went there and spoke, and he spoke at the Brandenburg Gate, they loved him. Everybody in Germany, not just Berlin, loved John F. Kennedy.
This speech was a great morale booster for West Germans who felt helpless against communism and the Soviet Union. The wall had separated so many people, and there were only 3 legal ways through it: Checkpoint Alpha, Checkpoint Bravo, or Checkpoint Charlie. Because getting through the checkpoints was so difficult, many people tried to cross the wall by tunneling under it, jumping or climbing over it, or being smuggled by someone going through a checkpoint. It's estimated that 140 people died while actively trying to cross the wall. 600 died in relation to crossing the wall, while approximately 5,000 were successful in crossing the wall.
What was kind of the vibe towards the wall?
Well, I didn't get to talk to a whole lot of people that lived there. I know they didn't like it. They were really upset about all of it. All of Berlin was. You can imagine the people on the east, if they tried to escape, they were killed, a lot of them. As a matter of fact, as we toured the next 3 days, there were places along the wall that a little memorial had been set up with flowers and whatnot in honor of somebody that had tried to escape and didn't make it. So,
to keep people from jumping and crossing, the Soviet Union placed barbed wire on top of the wall and plates of spikes below the wall. This area was known as the Death Strip.
Oh, yeah. Matter of fact, at different places, they would, on the western side, they put up like a little platform that you could walk up if the wall was too high to see over, and then you could look over it. Potsdamer Platz, I sent you some pictures if you look at those. When you look over the other side of the wall, they had what they called the Death Strip. They had taken about everything they could out of, they'd taken down buildings, they'd cleared out a whole strip that was probably a couple hundred yards wide. And in that strip, there were minefields. There were machine pillboxes. You could see them from the west side. You could see these pillboxes, which are in the ground with people with machine guns. There were guard towers, and there was a bunch of lights all along there to light it up so that nobody could sneak out at night. There were tank traps, which if you look at those pictures, those big things sticking up that kind of pyramid shape, they're steel I-beams that were welded together so that you couldn't drive a tank through there. And of course, they told everybody they were protecting the people in the east from the people in the west, which was just a big lie, obviously. But you could see all of that. I mean,
as mentioned earlier, crossing the wall was extremely difficult. Even legal crossings through the checkpoints were stressful.
We had to stop at the border crossing. It took 4 hours for us to get through the border crossing. And at that border crossing, there was all kinds of fences, and there was what they call the death strip that had been cleared off right in the middle of the forest. It's been all cleared out, and there was all kinds of things going on there to keep people from crossing from East Germany into West Germany.
What kind of things, like when they stopped you, did they like search you or anything? And what were they looking for?
Actually, going from West Germany into East Germany, they came in the bus, and at random they would just interview. Somebody interviewed me, wanted to know how much money I had, wanted to know why I was there, all kinds of things. They would look at your passport, and they would actually, both there and at Checkpoint Charlie in Berlin, where you went from West Berlin into East Berlin, they would actually take mirrors and roll them under the bus. They would come in the bus and pull up the carpet in the aisle to see if there was any trap doors that you could smuggle somebody in or out of the country with the bus or whatever. And so, yeah, they would come and they would talk to you, they would interview you, and it was just at random. They didn't talk to every single person, but they just pick somebody and start asking them a bunch of questions.
Yeah, so they were really serious about their...
Oh, yeah, they were really serious.
Mm-hmm.
And at both of those crossings, and especially I remember at Checkpoint Charlie in Berlin, as we sat there in the bus and looked out the windows, there was people on top of the buildings, machine guns, soldiers that would, if somebody tried to sneak through or break through that checkpoint, they weren't going to make it.
Mm-hmm.
And the checkpoints were set up in such a way that you didn't just drive straight through, you had to kind of zigzag through anyway.
Across the wall, the differences between East and West became very clear. In East Berlin, materials originally intended for reconstruction were instead used to build the wall. 20 years after World War II, East Berlin still had wreckage and rubble from the war.
Rubble that had been there since World War II.
Oh.
Buildings that had been bombed out and piles of rubble, both sides of that street. But they didn't take us down any of those streets. And the big stark thing between East and West Berlin was just this huge modern thriving city, and you go to East Berlin, and the few places and streets they took us down other than that main boulevard, the windows in the stores were empty, the stores were dark, there was hardly any cars or anything on the streets. It was just totally like night and day between East and West Berlin. The whole place was just dark. Was the feeling you got. And so they took us and they put an East German tour guide on the bus with us, and she was telling us all these wonderful things about East Berlin, but it was all stuff that they had just kind of set up, and that's what they showed people. They didn't like to see the bad stuff.
After almost 30 years, the Berlin Wall fell on November 9th, 1989. The wall fell because of pressure from East Berliners, the impending fall of the Soviet Union, and a bureaucratic misunderstanding. At a televised press conference, a Soviet spokesman said that, quote, private travel outside the country can now be applied for without prerequisites. Because it was all over the news, Berliners flocked to the wall in huge numbers. A confused guard gave the order to, quote, open the barrier, and people began picking at the wall with hammers and pickaxes.
The last day we were there,
some people kept a piece of the wall, including
my grandpa. 3 of us, as I recall, as I read my journal, 3 of us decided we wanted to go get a chunk of the wall. So we were in this youth hostel, and I don't understand, but the youth hostel was locked you couldn't get out. The doors were locked. So we climbed out a second-story window onto a scaffold, I believe, and climbed down the ladders from the scaffold and made our way over to the wall. And this part of the wall, it wasn't very far from the youth hostel, but it was like there was a street, and the wall was like right next to the street, pretty much. And so we just went over and got a chunk out of the wall. You couldn't get a whole brick, but we could get a piece of it with. So we each got a chunk of the wall.
America entered the Vietnam War on August 5, 1964. The war was fought between Communist North Vietnam and their allies, China and the USSR, against South Vietnam, a capitalistic country, and their ally, the United States. The US chose to enter the war because they were concerned that democracy would lose its foothold in South Asia if South Vietnam fell, because then the other surrounding countries could also possibly fall to communism.
Their attitude was, and they'd come up to you, you'd be riding the tram, which is like a cable car, street car, whatever. They'd come up to you because I guess we just kind of stood out as Americans.
Yeah, sure.
And they would come up to you and go, "You are wrong. You're making a big mistake." And then you should end this war in 3 days, or just get out of there. They said you could end it, but for some reason we don't understand why you're continuing this war. So they were pretty outspoken about it.
Yeah, that's crazy.
The war was a long and costly effort, costing the U.S. nearly $168 billion, killing 60,000 Americans and nearly 2 million Vietnamese. Considering the U.S.'s goal, it was a failure because North and South Vietnam were united under communist rule just 1 year after the war ended. Then in 1976, 1 year after that, the surrounding countries Laos and Cambodia also fell to communism. Today, the war is viewed as a mistake in America.
It didn't change them a whole lot. There was a lot of confusion about the war, and I tried to support the government. As I look back on it now, it was a big mistake. I agree it was a big mistake. But at the time, we were trying to support what was going on, at least I was.
Right.
And so my attitude was, yeah, we could end it in 3 days or get out, I suppose, but I guess I just really didn't understand everything about it or why we continued the war the way we did. Because true, the United States was powerful enough to end that war, but it just wasn't, I guess it wasn't politically expedient to do that at the time, for whatever reason. So my attitude kind of stayed the same. I was kind of neutral about it.
The Vietnam War and the Berlin Wall are two examples of the tensions between capitalist and communist ideologies coming to a head. These tensions continued throughout the 1980s and ended once the strategic arms reductions talks began, as well as other peace treaties. The U.S.-Russia relationship has improved since these talks began, but as of right now, their relationship is not great. With the invasion of Ukraine and Putin's refusal to participate in the New START treaty, the American view of Russia has greatly deteriorated. We will only see what happens in the future.